Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us at 4 o'clock on the Monday after a long holiday weekend. I hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving and that you're recovered from your turkey stupor. That's always an experience to get back to the cottage cheese. Anyway, welcome. We're delighted to have you here. We have a lot of special guests today to talk about such an important topic, and that is the teacher shortage. And we're going to focus today on the state of Virginia, which, as we were chatting a little bit earlier, this is such a fortuitous time to be doing this because, as you all know, the shortage of teachers, particularly in special education, is a nationwide phenomenon or crisis, as many have called it. And the state of Virginia has taken some rather interesting and noteworthy steps to address it. So the intersection of this grant and the activity in the state of Virginia, I think, is going to make for a really rich webinar today, but also a really rich doctoral program. So I'd like to get started by introducing our two distinguished deans of schools of education who are with us. And then we're going to circle back to the people you see on your screen there who are from the two institutions, Virginia Commonwealth University and George Mason University, the people who will be running the grant. So they will dig deeper into the details. But first I'd like to get started with our deans. And let me introduce them to you. We have Dean Andrew Dare. He's on the right of your screen. He is the Dean at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Education, as well as a professor in the Counselor Education program. Prior to this, he was Associate Dean for Research and Professor in the College of Education at the University of Houston in Texas, and likewise at the University of Central Florida. He has conducted extensive research on family stability and mobility with economically marginalized and fragile couples and families, and maintains a secondary research area in career development and STEM, one of our other big teacher shortage areas. Dr. Dare's received over $16 million in federal grants to support this work and has conducted a lot of research. His area of couple and family interventions to reduce stress and improve family, economic, and health outcomes in low-income, ethnic minority, and underserved populations continues, and we're so pleased to have you with us, Dr. Dare. Let me also introduce Dr. Mark Ginsberg. Dr. Ginsberg is the Dean of the School of Education and Human Development at George Mason University. Mark, prior to coming to this deanship, spent 11 years as Executive Director of the very prominent and influential organization in Washington, the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And there, of course, is another personnel challenge, getting the early childhood educators that we need in the classroom. Mark has had a 35-year career as a professor, psychologist, and administrator. He also serves as the vice chair of the board of directors of an international organization called Parents as Teachers. And he's also on the board of an organization called HopeCam, a nonprofit which supports children with cancer and their families. Mark is the past chair of the board of the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, the national organization comprised of schools and colleges and education around the country. And he was also on the board of the Council of Academic Deans of Research Education Institutions. He serves in a number of other capacities with a number of different national and international organizations, and we welcome you, Dr. Ginsberg.
Thanks, Jane.
So let's just get started here with a few questions, and I'd like to just put them out there and ask both of you if you would respond with your perspectives. The first is, as I said earlier, as we all know, virtually every state in the nation is facing a teacher shortage. some of them quite extreme. States are responding in all kinds of different ways. The sort of confluence and pressure of the teacher shortage in some states has yielded a lowering of standards, just simply so they can put bodies in the classroom. Other states are trying other things, which I think are perhaps more substantial in terms of the long run for the profession. But let's talk a little bit about Virginia. What would you say is the status of the teaching profession in Virginia in terms of attracting, preparing, and retaining teachers, and particularly in the special ed area, which we're most concerned about? Who would like to go first?
Probably either one of us can. I'm looking at you, Andrew. You're smiling. You want to go first? You're not hearing you though.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Are you there, Andrew?
Hi.
There you go.
There we go.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we sure can.
Okay. Probably, Mark, if we can just maybe even go back and forth, because
Sure.
I'm sure some things that you might say might conjure up some things for me. But
Sure. Exactly.
you know, this is my 4th year in Virginia, so I just feel like I need to add that as a qualifier, because there are folks who have been in the Commonwealth for a lot longer, and so it might amplify some of the things that I'm saying, and hopefully it won't negate it, but that may also happen. But you know, I feel that there's a lot that the state is doing, really even compared to Texas and Florida, in terms of really taking a strong and more immediate approach, and even a broader based approach at looking at what's happening related to the teacher shortage. You know, I think the decision to allow teachers to be prepared at the bachelor's level, to go back to that decision, I think that actually was a strong decision, because I think it really puts colleges and schools of education back in the driver's seat in preparing educators and looking at things that, and when I say things, looking at practices and best practices that can be implemented very early on in their education and training, opposed to really waiting until the 5th year to when they're fully our student. And so I think that decision is a good one. I think what we need to ensure, though, is that colleges and schools of education are not just taking the 5-year programs and compressing them into 4-year programs, but actually capitalizing on this opportunity to do things a little bit different in terms of how we're preparing educators, and particularly making sure that we're doing things differently in preparing educators for success and impact in our hardest to staff schools. Because we talk more generally and globally about the teacher shortage, but what we don't realize, well, not that we don't realize, I think we're fully aware of it, that really we should be talking about the teacher shortage in the hard to staff schools. Because I think once we brush a broad stroke in terms of talking about the teacher shortage in general, it really takes us away of looking and focusing at the epicenter of that shortage, which is in our hardest to staff schools, which tend to be our urban and rural schools, where folks are living in poverty, and particularly Black and brown students living in poverty. And so we also have to look at what we're doing differently in preparing educators to be successful in that area. And we have a lot of different groups within the state that's actually addressing that issue, even including the new Commission on African American History and Education. I think something like that is actually important, because it's moving us closer towards ensuring that K-12 education, which I think, as Rodney Robinson says, we've got this, it's one of the few careers where potential candidates have a 12-year on-the-job observation. So we really have to be asking ourselves some tougher questions, and why after this 12 years of on-the-job observation, we still are having some of the challenges that we're having.
Yeah, let me, I think those are all good points, Andrew, and I wouldn't disagree with anything that you've said. Let me just add to it and maybe take a little bit different angle to the one that you've begun with. First of all, I think the shortage of teachers across the country is acute, and the shortage of teachers in the Commonwealth is just as acute as anywhere in the nation. There are some areas in education where the shortages are deeper and broader, and special education probably is the area of greatest need, but it's not the area of only need. 10 years ago, when I came to George Mason, my 10th year at the university, we literally had a surplus of elementary educators in the Commonwealth. Today we have a shortage. And so the shortage areas cut across all areas. But I think, and I would agree, that creating undergraduate pathway programs is part of the solution, but I don't think it's a silver bullet. I want to attack it a little differently, that I think in special ed we have a very complicated issue around retention, where in Virginia we've allowed there to be provisionally licensed teachers with a modicum of training who go into our schools, who we expect to function as fully prepared professionals, and who frankly are unable to function as fully prepared professionals, in large part because they simply aren't fully prepared professionals. And what happens is the retention rate among our special educators is among the poorest of any of the groups. I don't know the specific percentage broken for special educators, broken down for special educators, but I can tell you that the annual turnover for new hires of teachers in the Commonwealth, first-year teachers, about 22% of first-year teachers leave teaching either within or by the end of the first year. And my inference and belief is that for special educators, it's far higher than that. So I think we need to take a look at also how is it that we support new teachers, and I advocate for revisiting the controversial policy of provisional licensure, or at least trying to think about ways that we can differently and better support provisional licensed teachers so that the turnover rate isn't so great because the proficiency rate and the proficiency of our teachers is greater. I do want to, though, reinforce what Andrew said. The epicenter of the teacher shortage is in certain areas, but that doesn't make the teacher shortage any less grave in areas that it may not be as acute, because it is acute everywhere. And so I think we need to look at the issues and also come to the conclusion that one size might not fit all. There might be different approaches that can be taken that'll have differential impact. And as Andrew said, I think preparing our teachers to work with all students, not just some of our students, is not only important and critical, it's absolutely essential. So Jane, I know there's some other questions, but this is a good
no, that's enormously helpful. Just sort of adding a little bit about what we know from the research around teacher education, and that is that those who are fully prepared stay longer. There is a relationship between being fully prepared and retention. And I think we don't sort of repeat that talking point enough. The challenge becomes what to do in the short term versus, well, it should be an and. Yes, we have to get somebody in the classroom, but to do that without a long-term strategy is very short-sighted, like you have done.
And without sufficient support for those who enter the classroom, I think, which is terribly important.
Yeah, very important. Let's go on to the next one, because I'm really wonder if you can give us a little bit of history about this movement to allowing undergraduate preparation. My understanding is that up until this year, you have to have a master's, you have had to have a master's degree to be a fully certified teacher in the state of Virginia, and that this is a new provision saying you can be a fully certified teacher with an undergraduate program. But can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be, the roles that the governor, the legislature, the Department of Ed have played in trying to address this challenge?
Sure. The initial, though, assumption is not entirely correct. There were pathway programs at some universities to become certified or licensed as a teacher with a bachelor's degree and additional courses, not necessarily a master's degree.
Okay.
And it's also the case that there are some specialty areas in the Commonwealth before this year that were, an undergraduate level program, not exclusively, but as an option. And those are in the areas of physical education, art education, theater education, and music education were undergraduate programs. But historically, you're right, the modal way of becoming an educator in Virginia was to achieve a master's degree. This has been the case for about 30 years in Virginia. And it came about for probably all the right reasons, because the data do tell us that the more education and training one has, the more proficiency one, more proficient one becomes. The more proficient one becomes, the more successful they are in the classroom. And as you inferred, the more likely they are to stay in the classroom and retain in the profession. The reality of it, though, is that being in a 5 or 6 year master's program is both time and cost intensive. And the data was telling us that if we can look to, as Andrew inferred as well, reimagine how it is we're educating teachers, preparing teachers, that perhaps we can be more efficient in doing that in 4 years. But as I've said from the beginning on this, and I was involved in the discussions right when we began the conversation 4 or 5 years ago, that the awarding of a bachelor's degree and a license to teach shouldn't be the beginning of the end, rather it should be the end of the beginning. In other words, we should place people in classrooms if they've been able to complete a reimagined educator preparation program that provides them with knowledge, skills, and abilities, including significant practice in schools under the supervision of a master's teacher, with the idea that they continue in 2 ways. One, that they continue in a program of support, the so-called induction programs, for 2 to 4 years in a program that's carefully designed, well articulated, and carefully delivered. In my best case, in collaboration between the school divisions of the state and the universities, and that there also be incentives for teachers to have continuing education, advanced study education at the master's level, ultimately at the doctoral level as well, so that a bachelor's degree, again, is not the beginning of the end, but really the end of the beginning. And that's been our goal. We now have 13 institutions in the Commonwealth that have been approved to offer undergraduate education for teachers. Almost all those programs so far have been in elementary education, early childhood education, or special education. Very few have been in secondary, which is a little more complicated to do. But we are now, I think, in kind of a living laboratory to hopefully be able to demonstrate that this decision was a wise one, and people both are well prepared, functioning well, and their students are thriving.
Drew, what do you think?
The only things that I would add is just a little bit more about the process. I know there were a number of different task force. There was Chev had a task force on the teacher shortage. Prior to that, the VDOE had a task force on diversifying the Virginia educator pipeline. I know with that task force, there was some work that was commissioned from I think the Virginia Governors Association. I may have gotten that name incorrect, but there was a person that came in and was looking at some data nationwide, and both of these task forces provided recommendations which included provisions for teacher preparation for licensure at the undergraduate level. And so there was a lot of work from various different stakeholders that went into that. And so different groups were providing similar recommendations, and Governor McAuliffe then made an executive order for that issue to be, and again, I'll get some of the legislative terminology wrong on this, but McAuliffe made an executive order, and then VDOE working with Chev worked with the different colleges and schools of education that were moving forward with that. I also serve on the advisory board for teacher education and licensure. I know that we've got 76 additional programs that are going to be reviewed soon. I can't remember from the number of public and private institutions, but those are individual degree programs. So I know that across the Commonwealth, a lot of colleges and schools of education are really being responsive to this situation.
Yeah.
And let me just confirm
quick
with
thing. Let me just add one quick thing, Jane, that the provost of the public universities in the state about 18 months ago held a meeting, and one of the subjects of their meeting was to discuss what are the biggest vulnerabilities the state has with respect to its economic development. And the greatest vulnerability that was identified by a group of engineers, as it turns out, because nearly all the provosts are engineers, was the shortage of teachers in the Commonwealth.
Wow.
Andrew and I have been fortunate to serve on a group that's been trying to look at these issues in a systematic way and a systemic way as well, and to try to address them through a variety of means. And one of the means, in fact, probably the first thing to come to fruition, was this notion of creating pathway programs at the undergraduate level that would be major programs of study in education. That is, a student would be awarded a degree in education. And we did that very deliberately because the view that we had was that we needed to be sure that students saw education not as something to do, but as a field or profession that they entered. And I think that's very important, that there be an affinity and an identity for education. And so I think having these undergraduate programs, not just an undergraduate degree in chemistry with a teaching license, but an undergraduate degree in education with a license to teach chemistry, it was very significant.
That's a very good point. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That's a really good point. Just one more follow-up question. Was this effort, you said it was specifically in response to economic concerns in the state. Was it also particularly designed to address the shortage?
Well, yeah, the project that we're involved in has been, but the concern that was addressed is that schools, and I love to talk about this concept, I often say that schools are magnets, and schools are magnets for talent. Virginia has the most highly educated workforce in the country, and highly educated people, in fact, all people, those who are highly educated or those who strive for higher education for themselves or their children, they strive to come to places where they see the schools as being of high quality. It's what brings people to communities, it's what keeps people in communities, and it would also develops, and through a Grow Your Own initiatives in schools, talent for communities. And so having high quality schools is a necessary condition for economic vitality. And we know that the most important ingredient for what makes a quality school is the quality of the workforce, in particular the quality and capacity of the teacher, as well as the ability to leadership. And so a teacher shortage is something that creates really significant vulnerability.
Thanks. Let's go on to the third one here, and we'll wrap up with that. You mentioned Grow Your Own, Mark. That's something we haven't talked about. That seems to be a hot phrase, and everyone seems to have a different definition for it. Right. But I wonder if you all have any knowledge or awareness of other initiatives underway to address the teacher shortage in Virginia, and in particular, what might be going on at your own universities. Dr. Dare, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. So, at the state level, this is something that we continue to discuss at the advisory board for teacher education and licensure, and their current legislation that are being proposed and discussed that that somewhat relates to this issue of removing some of the barriers and creating an easier pathway. There are conversations on addressing praxis. And so there's a lot of conversations that are continuing to happen at the state level. And I think it would be fair to maybe summarize them as really removing some of the barriers that might exist and addressing some of the, I'll just say removing some of the barriers that might exist. I know at VCU, and I don't know if I'd call some of these innovative, but maybe new things that we're doing. you know, we're meeting with our representatives in our surrounding school divisions with the Teachers for Tomorrow program, and in looking at how can we develop stronger partnerships with those programs and the students who are taking those courses, so that we can create a stronger to create a pipeline for those students into our teacher preparation programs. We have hired an additional recruiter, and in addition to looking at general teacher pipelines, are wanting to develop some pipelines for underrepresented minority teachers. I'm sure Dr. Laurent Scott is going to talk about his grant, so I won't steal his thunder there, but you know, when we had the ribbon cutting for that, one of the things that I assured was that the grant is seed funding for something that we have to ensure that our school supports, because that is too important of work to just exist, you know, for the 3 years of funding, but to actually continue. So I guess, Dr. Scott, it's now on record that I've made that commitment. And then we also have an innovative teacher pipeline program where we are recruiting internally for our students who want to be in urban and high need schools, and providing them the training that we feel, to be honest, that all educators should have, where we're leaning into understanding poverty, privilege, racism, their own implicit bias and white fragility, understanding culturally responsive practice and pedagogy, and then understanding trauma-informed approaches and restorative practices, and getting these students into classrooms early, and having this as a vehicle to create innovative connections with the school divisions, where these students who are in their preparation program are also exposed to teachers who are already in urban high need schools. So those are just some of the things that we're doing here at VCU.
Yeah, they're all wonderful things.
Before I turn it over to you, I just want to really thank you for underscoring the lack of diversity in our profession. And, you know, we have a shortage, but we really have likewise a crisis with attracting teachers of color, particularly Black men. So I know that you all are both doing a lot of work in that area, and it's just, yeah, really important to remember that. Mark?
Yeah,
Mark, can I just add one thing really quick, just as a follow-up, Jane? You know, the other thing that we don't talk about, we talk a lot about teacher diversity, but what we don't talk about is the need for faculty diversity in colleges and schools of education. Yep. We talk a lot about implicit bias and these other trainings for teachers, but we're not talking about those things for faculty in colleges and schools of education. I know that Mark, myself, and Jane Bray at ODU, and a lot of other folks are really leaning into that issue, and faculty diversity, faculty understanding of their own implicit bias, and how we can create a collective atmosphere that's going to be more conducive to not only recruiting, but ensuring the success of underrepresented minority students.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, let me start by saying I think what Andrew's doing at VCU and the work that he's doing nationally on these very important, critical, yet complex issues is really exemplary, and he's really helped to be a tremendous leader here in the Commonwealth. A few other things just to add. One is, I think professional identity doesn't often begin when one comes to the university. It begins much earlier. And so I think linking in with the P12 schools is terrifically important. Doing so with linking our own Educator Rising or Teachers of Tomorrow kind of programs at the university with related programs in the school divisions, having there to be linkages that are meaningful, having our faculty have engagements in the schools, not just with training their candidates who are student teaching or providing practicum experiences in the schools, but also meeting with and having exposure to students, and students having exposure to ed prep faculty. To that end, I think it's also very important, and we're trying very hard to bring into the schools a greater array of dual enrollment courses, both in collaboration with the community colleges and through our own auspices, so that students could get a taste for ed prep while they're in the P12 environment, and get a head start, in fact, on their college curriculum while they're in the P12 environment too. Having said that, we also think that in the ed prep space, a minority, or I should say probably a majority of teachers coming into our ed prep programs, at least our current undergraduate programs, are transferring from the community colleges, not coming to Mason as freshmen. And so having linkages so that students have aligned curriculum, so the transfer of credit issue is such they're not losing credit. Because the secret is that most students who transfer from the community college to the 4-year will often lose time and credit, and as a consequence lose money also. So creating articulation programs that are meaningful and successful are important, and creating scholarship programs that support students in educator prep programs.
We haven't really talked about the level of student debt, particularly hits minority students very hard, and that's absolutely
it's particularly hard if you're coming into a job that's paying you $46,000 a year, which makes it doubly challenging. Yeah. So having things like a Virginia Teacher Fellows Program, having meaningful loan programs that allow for loan forgiveness and the like are very important, as well as supporting new teachers with not just meaningful supports in terms of induction, but with a meaningful salary, with supports for childcare and housing, with other kinds of supports that'll support new teachers so that they come into the field without having both the debt and the burden of expense. So I think you add together all of these kinds of things, and none of them are going to do the trick, I think, independent of the other. It has to be, I think, multidimensional and systemic and integrated.
This is why we need a doctoral program to really study these issues and help move us forward. I want to thank both of you for giving us a wonderful opening here and really setting the stage for our conversation. I just wonder if there's any final thoughts you might have before we move on to our next set of speakers. Dr. Dare, any final thought you'd like to offer?
Just words of appreciation that you all are having these conversations and really the opportunity just to address some issues. You know, Mark has obviously been here longer than I have, but I will say that one of the things that is good that's happening in the Commonwealth is that the deans of our colleges and schools of education and directors of our teacher preparation programs have really coalesced to work together to address these issues and to have a shared voice of really advocating for teacher preparation. And I just think there are more exciting things to come here in Virginia because I think we've really put the needs of the students in the Commonwealth even above kind of some of the competitive needs you might see between colleges and schools of education. So just appreciative of this opportunity to participate in this conversation. I do have to run in about 5 or 10 minutes, but just wanted to say that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mark?
I would underscore that as well. I think there's a great sense of collaboration among the universities and among the individuals who are leading our colleges and schools of education, as Andrew said. You know, a very smart person I admire once said that it takes a village. And I think this is one of those times that it really does. It takes all of us. It will take all of us. And I'm pleased to Jane, agree with you that I think we're in an enviable position in Virginia where we have alignment with the governor's office, with the governor himself, with senior people in the office, with our colleagues at the Department and Board of Education and its governance structure, with Chev, and certainly at the universities across the state, both public and private, that we all concur that this is a critically important issue. And critically important issues sometimes demand that we not do business as usual. And certainly in special education, which is the tip of a big spear in terms of the problem, we can't do business as usual. And so I would echo what you've said and to say to the group on the phone that all suggestions are welcome, all initiatives and efforts are appreciated, and please be in touch with those of us in higher ed who are working on these issues to help us figure it out. We know the problem. I think we know what some of the questions are. We don't have all the answers to those questions, to be sure, and we need everybody's help to figure out what the best answers are. So thank you again, very appreciative, and thank you, Sarah, for inviting me, and Jane, you for moderating this. Appreciate it.
Well, certainly. Thank you all very much. You know, your point about alignment in Virginia is very significant. There are many states where they do not have alignment, as you well know, and that makes it even more complex. You all are very well poised to really lead the way in addressing this in a very meaningful way. So thanks to both of you for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to do it and look forward to continued work with you as this grant unfolds.
Thanks so much.
We're going to turn now to our next speakers. We have 4 more speakers who are going to join us. Next, I'd like to turn to Dr. LaRon Scott from Virginia Commonwealth University. Let me introduce Dr. Scott, who I have had the great pleasure to get to know over the last several years in working with him. He is Associate Professor and Co-Interim Chair for the Department of Counseling and Special Education at Virginia Commonwealth University. His research focuses on equitable recruitment and retention strategies for underrepresented minority teachers, especially Black male special education teachers. The greatest area of need, I must say. He continues a second line of research focusing on secondary transition practices for Black students with disabilities. He's been awarded over $5 million in federal, state, and private funding to support his research, and nearly $500,000 from the National Center for Teacher Residency, where he established the Minority Educator Recruitment, Retention, and Equity Center, where he serves as executive director. This is the center that Dr. Dare mentioned. Dr. Scott, take it away.
Thank you, Jane. So yes, that's the center that Dr. Dare also said that he will continue to support. So we got that on record here. So,
absolutely.
So yeah, thank you for, I think there's been really great discussion on the topic of what Virginia is doing to really tackle the challenges that we're facing with the teacher shortage issue. And we've, to some degree, have talked about the challenges that we're having, and on top of that, I think what I'd like to do is concentrate on the efforts to increase minority educators here in Virginia, particularly our special education teachers. When we look at the numbers across the nation, we know that we're facing a big challenge with increasing our underrepresented minority population of educators, and that's no different here in Virginia, where we see about 49 to 50% of our students are of color, and our educator workforce is about 77% white. And this is really numbers that we see across the nation. And so at a local level, or here in Virginia, the sense of what we're doing to acknowledge, but also get folks through the pipeline and also ensure that they are retained, I think is incredibly important that we figure this out. And so when we look at Virginia efforts, Sarah, you can go to the next slide, I'm sorry. So some of the Virginia efforts around this issue, and Dr. Dare and Dr. Ginsburg spoke of this to some degree. When we look at the efforts by the Virginia General Assembly to address the issue of increasing our underrepresented minority teachers, and on top of that, our teachers of color in special education. One initiative is the Traineeship for Education of Special Education Personnel, which is an annual competition that universities are able to apply for. And this traineeship grant opportunity has really allowed for universities to partner with local divisions, local school districts, in order to find creative pathways to not only bring special education teachers or those who have interest in becoming special education teachers into the pipeline, but also retain them. And so here at Virginia Commonwealth University, we've taken I think, a rather unique approach to addressing this issue, and also have set a goal or a benchmark to ensure that 40% of those that we bring into this pipeline are teachers of color. Additionally, the Virginia General Assembly has set aside funds for teacher residency partnerships. So we look at we look at groups, or we look at partnerships that have been created between some of our high-need schools and high-need districts. So we look at Norfolk, Richmond, Petersburg. These divisions have been able to partner with higher education institutes in order to create these partnerships and pathways to support the pipeline of educators, particularly when we think that residency programs, for example, have done a pretty decent job over the past few years of diversifying the folks who are entering their program and supporting those individuals once they are in as teacher of record. Certainly, Dr. Ginsberg talked about the Virginia Teaching Scholarship Loan Program, which offers up to $10,000 for folks who are interested in working in high need areas such as special education. That program, I think, has been really interesting to watch and follow. The money has created opportunities for individuals who ordinarily would not have been interested in teaching, particularly in special education, as an incentive to enter into the workforce and also stay. And most recently, we saw that Virginia General Assembly offered, I believe it was $50,000, and I may be wrong with that number, but $50,000 to offer tutoring support and licensure, and to pay for licensure tests for individuals, particularly teachers of color who may need that financial support as they matriculate through their programs. So I won't talk about the task force on diversifying Virginia educators pipeline. Dr. Dare, I thought, did a really good job of sharing that information. Again, that task force was commissioned by the Secretary of Education. But when we look at the goals of that task force and look at other organizations, whether national or state level, that have put forward recommendations for how do we improve, how do we increase the number of underrepresented minority educators in our pipeline, the goals have been pretty consistent. And but what we have to do more of is to think about theoretically these goals and initiatives sound really great. The challenge that we are going to need to settle over the next few years is really doing research to understand whether these goals and initiatives or theoretical funding initiatives that have been put out are effective. And so the next 5 to 10 years, I think, is going to be really interesting to see where we go in terms of whether these goals were actually effective. Next slide. So most recently, and again, Dr. Daris talked about this some, we were awarded almost a $500,000 grant through the National Center for Teacher Residency. What we're recognizing is that we not only need to ensure that underrepresented minority students are able to meet the needs of students of color, but also that our students feel supported during their preparation and throughout their careers. So focusing on recruiting underrepresented minority educators is not enough. We also need to provide proper support once they're in our programs and after they have become teachers of record. And so this center is really devoted to providing supports for recruiting, preparing, retaining those URM educators by providing a safe hub for communicating their needs and providing a variety of supports to meet their individual needs. And this type of initiative is really comes out of the types of efforts that we see with the Task Force on Diversifying Virginia Educators and the Learning Policy Institute. Next slide. Next slide, Sarah. Sarah, next. There we go. Thank you. One slide back.
Sure. If I can manage that.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we are looking at 4 really specific goals that align with the initiatives that have come out of the Diversifying Virginia Educators pipeline, along with those initiatives identified through the Learning Policy Institute. One of those being the mentoring and induction support that Dr. Ginsberg mentioned is critically important for teachers in general, but when we think about the needs of educators of color, current research really suggests that ongoing mentoring and other support, specifically culturally competent peer support mentoring models, can improve the certification process for minority teachers. So leaning into that goal and creating that type of infrastructure and support within the center is one of the really exciting goals that I'm really encouraged by. We're also looking at co-curricular experiences with the emphasis on differentiated professional development for teachers of color in a way to address unique needs that have received considerable attention in the research and policy that I described earlier from the task force and LPI. Next slide. So research on recruiting and retaining teachers of color consistently cites the rising cost of teacher preparation programs as a barrier for these educators. So the same research notes that reducing the cost of tuition providing scholarships and offering loan forgiveness are valid ways to improve the teacher of color pipeline. And also monitoring ways that we are designing or tracking these candidates once they go into our teacher preparation program and once they exit and go into the profession. So building data systems to track the racial diversity of these candidates and understanding what their needs, what their barriers, and what their successes are will help us to develop a sound understanding of whether the goals or whether the supports that are currently in place are effective or whether we need to consider something else. All right, so I think that's all I had for now. I don't want to carry on too much further. We're short on time.
Thank you so much, LaRon. You know, 2 things come to mind for me. We don't have time to talk about them, but there's so much in the research about obstacles for people of color in terms of entering the teaching profession. You know, often cited is people's own poor experience in K-12 schools. Another is the needs for childcare, and people of color often have less resources financially, are likely to need to have a second job, and are more likely to have childcare responsibilities. A third is the praxis, as Dr. Dare mentioned. I'm sure you're aware of all of these things. But do you want to make a comment before we move on?
I will. I'll take your first point, that it is an incredibly sensitive topic and conversation to the degree that, yes, understanding the historical context of the trauma that many Black and Brown students have faced when we look at the overrepresentation of students of color, for example, in special education, or we look at some of the challenges that students have faced with implicit bias or other discriminatory acts within schools, and then we ask those same students to become teachers. And so it's a really big ask. And so understanding that historical context and really developing initiatives around these types of challenges, I think is something that we still have not touched on as a field, and an area that certainly deserves more attention.
Thank you. Just so many important questions. I want to move on now to hear a little bit more specifically about the grant, the PRISE grant that George Mason and Virginia Commonwealth are undertaking, which will directly address many of the challenges we've talked about. We have 3 speakers we're going to hear from, I believe. Dr. Sarah Negro is with George Mason University. She received her doctorate in special education from Johns Hopkins. She is a co-PI of this grant. She is the lead at George Mason University on this grant. Sarah's research focuses on preparing teachers to find success when educating students with disabilities with the goal of retaining high-quality professionals. She is a member of the executive board of the Teacher Education Division of the Council for Exceptional Children and of the Higher Education Consortium for Special Education. Dr. Colleen Thoma is the lead for this grant at Virginia Commonwealth University. Her research expertise is in transition planning and services that support self-determination of youth with disabilities, the preparation of secondary special educators to support inclusive education, transition outcomes, and disability policy. She is past president of the Division on Career Development and Transition and co-editor of Inclusion, an online journal. Also with us, we have Dr. Cassandra Willis, who is a recent graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University. And I hope she'll share a little bit about her wonderful experience being a doctoral student at VCU. Who would like to go first? Colleen or Sarah?
Colleen would.
Okay, Colleen, you've been voluntold.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jane. And I'm so excited to see the interest that all of you folks have had in addressing teacher shortages and learning about what we're doing here in Virginia. The PRISE grant is a doctoral leadership training project that's funded from the U.S. Department of Education from the Office of Special Ed Programs. They realize that not only are we facing a severe teacher shortage, but we're facing a looming shortage of faculty ready to prepare that the next generation of special educators. And obviously looking at a diverse pool of those faculty members. So the PRISE Scholar Project was an idea that we submitted to OSEP and we were funded. The focus of this is really to prepare doctoral level leaders who are ready to conduct research and are really interested in conducting research about the shortage of teacher preparation or shortage of teachers in the field in special education, and particularly addressing some of the solutions. As both Deans Ginsberg and Dare pointed out, there have been a lot of changes here in Virginia. With the new undergraduate program, most of our universities have some kind of an alternative program, alternative licensure program. We have online education. There's just a lot that's happening here in Virginia. And I think it was Dean Ginsberg that talked about this as a living laboratory. And so that's the laboratory that these PRISE scholars will work in. They'll be learning to talk with state and national policymakers and learn about the information they need to guide their efforts, and then how to develop research studies that collect the data and analyze the data and then communicate it back with those policymakers so they can actually use it. you know, we need to stop throwing ideas at the problem and really start collecting data and determine the impact of some of these innovative approaches. Are they really working, and are they doing what we're expecting them to do? So our PRISE scholars, we have funding to bring in 7 full-time doctoral students here at VCU and 6 at George Mason University. They will work together as a team. They will still go through the same doc program requirements either at George Mason or VCU, but they'll have that additional level of experience. We're excited to know that Dr. Jane West is going to be one of those collaborators with us on the project, but we also have some connections with some of the leading national organizations and centers that address the teacher shortage in special education. We have a connection with AACTE, with the Cedar Center, and with the Iris Center. So a lot of those will be opportunities for our PRISE scholars to learn from the experts and help that not only guide their development, but also give them an opportunity to have an input and an impact earlier on. So again, we have funding to focus on a stipend every year that will cover the time that you'll be working in the field. It covers tuition and fees. It provides some funding for annually for you to go to conferences related to teacher education. And there is some funding for some additional technology and some of that support. So we're really excited to be able to offer that level of funding to people in the state of Virginia at these 2 universities. Sarah, did you want to say anything else about what's happening there at George Mason?
Thank you. Very well said. I would just like to add that at George Mason, we actually do have 3 fully funded doctoral training opportunities. The PRISE scholarship is one of 3. And so I would encourage you to come visit our website. I included the link on this slide so that you can see the PRISE website. This will also allow you to see the opportunities that we do have for the other 2, one focusing on literacy and the third focusing on technology and online preparation. I want to also encourage you to do this quickly because our deadline for applications is January 15th, and we don't want you to miss out on this exciting opportunity. That's the George Mason deadline for applying to the PRISE scholarship. It's January 15th. And I just wanted to emphasize that we feel strongly that we should see ourselves in the profession. Our professional lens through which we approach this work needs to include an eye towards policy and advocacy. And so as we are preparing these doctoral students, we will be focusing on how do they prepare a line of research, as Dr. Thoma explained, that is responsive to, but also informs future policy that will shape the future in our teacher pipeline and really the profession overall in terms of how people see themselves in the profession. So we're really excited about this opportunity. We have so many interesting internship activities planned. So please do feel free to contact myself here at Mason or Dr. Thoma or Dr. Scott at VCU. And I'm going to now turn it over to Cassandra.
And I won't take that long. I'm picking my son up, but I had a wonderful experience as a doctoral student. While it was focused on special education and disability policy, and all about it was called Research to Policy Advocacy. So it was a deep dive into the policies. So those of you who are on the call and are thinking, what are they talking about? General Assembly. Most of that stuff, I had no idea what it was. And so my first year, I was able to intern with Governor McCullough in the Secretary of Education's office and help the grant to the National Governors Association that started the Task Force for Diversifying Virginia's Educator Pipeline. In fact, last week, Jane, I was actually tapped by AACTE to help moderate some Twitter town halls. and I'm working on a book chapter. So lots of things that I would not have had the opportunity to do had I not been in the doc program. And what Dr. Scott talked about, diversifying the teacher workforce, is very, very dear to my heart. In fact, I've been trying to get in touch with my 4th grade teacher for years, and I got an email from her just last week, and it brought tears in my eyes because I told LaRon I wanted to work on this project where we take pictures of students with their teachers and say, you know, call it They See Me, because it's so different. If you look at the media, I know a lot of people say, well, are you advocating Black teachers for Black students? No, but we are advocating that there is a workforce that is reflective of our student body. Because even me at 46, trying to navigate the doc program, I encountered some issues, and it was because I could go to my advisor, LaRon Scott, and he didn't have to know my history. He didn't have to know what I was. He instinctively knew, and I could navigate the program. So it's important at all levels. This work is super important. I'm in a school division now, majority white workforce, increases, of course, all across the state, increases in discipline, increases of students referrals. Now I know why. Now I know the research. A lot of these things existed before, but now I understand, and I can direct my research or work within my division to do things that work, things that matter. Like, how do we diversify? Well, here are some things right here. How do we decrease student discipline? Let's really work on getting people culturally competent and understanding the why. Someone just was in my office today talking about some discipline problems a child is having, and he's homeless, right? He's homeless. He's in 10th grade. He's homeless. He's taking care of 4 brothers and sisters. So when the teacher says, take off your coat every single morning, she's going to get pushed back because he's raising a family, basically, as a 15-year-old. So this work is important to me. I have had a wonderful opportunity. If anybody wants to know how to take the dive and do this full time, call me, because I had a very successful career. I was an associate principal, and I left and did this work full time. So if anybody wants to talk to me about how it can be done, how you can survive, how to navigate it, call me, email me. I'll be more than happy to talk to how you plan your life, because I did it in 3 years and it's okay and I'm still alive.
Thank you so much. Cassandra also didn't mention that she has 2 children. So she has done it all, and we're so glad you did, Cassandra, and you're out there just making it happen. So thank you so much for that. With that, we wonder if anyone has any questions. Please put them in the chat room box there. And actually, while we're looking for that, I'm going to ask one question to you, Dr. Thoma and Dr. Scott. What is the deadline for applying to the PRISE grant at VCU? George Mason told us their deadline is January 15th. What is your deadline?
We have a February 1st deadline.
Okay.
So yeah, we are up against some, a time limit there with getting the group on. All 13 of these scholars will start in the fall, and it will cover their full 3.5 to 4 years of the doc program. So this is not the kind of funding where we bring in a small group 1 year and then another group the following year. So again, we are looking for people who are ready for the fall. There'll be a few things in the summer, but fall will be the beginning of the program.
I think having gone through a doctoral program myself in special education, boy, do I wish I had had an opportunity like this to go through with a cohort. If this is something that's at all appealing to you, I really encourage you to follow up. If you've got to manage logistics, like Cassandra mentioned, it's a big leap to leave a job and do something else full time, but it will definitely pay off, and you will be fully supported in doing it. So January 15th for George Mason, February 1st for Virginia Commonwealth University. I don't see any questions in the chat box. So
And
unless,
Jane, as
yes,
you know, as Sarah mentioned, if people are interested but aren't really sure, you know, again, Dr. Negro, Dr. Scott and I are happy to talk with you more to provide a little more details about what is doctoral study versus what the PRISE cohort will be focused on. So that's probably part of the decision-making process for any person taking on this project.
terrific. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Have a lovely rest of the evening, and we look forward to reading your application.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.